Okay, want to introduce our speaker. Matt Bergman is a learning technology specialist at the Milton Hershey School in Hershey. A member of CASTS, do they pronounce it CAST?
Yeah.
It's not C-A-S-T. Professional Learning, cadre. He's made numerous presentations at various venues, including ISTE, Harvard University, Towson, Temple, and Boston University, and now Mount Lebanon. So, welcome Matt Bergman.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Well, thank you for having me here. I am a little disappointed, though, because Chris said that he was going to order some really warm weather, and he didn't. So that was a joke, just to let you know. So anyways, I'm really glad to be here today. Like Chris had said, I'm from the Milton Hershey School in Hershey, PA, and just privileged to be here and privileged to speak at numerous venues all over the country. I live in a small town called Lidditz, Pennsylvania. Anybody ever hear Lidditz? Yeah. It literally won the coolest small town in America in 2012. And so I get in my car in the morning, and I smell Wilbur chocolate. And then I drive an hour, or maybe 45 minutes northwest, get out of my car, and I smell Hershey chocolate. So I got to say my life is pretty sweet. And I used to be a middle school teacher and a high school teacher. I was a public school teacher for many years. Thought I was going to be in that district forever. I was training to be an administrator. And then what happened was budget cuts came. And unfortunately, my position was cut. And so I stumbled into a wonderful organization called the Milton Hershey School. Now, if you're not familiar with the school, it brings in students as early as age 4 all the way up to 18, 19 years old. 100% of our kids come from poverty. So 80% come from Pennsylvania, the remaining 20 come from the rest of the United States. And so we invest about $100,000 per year per kid because we want to break the cycle of poverty. So they live at the school, they have an education, and when they graduate, they get an $85,000 college scholarship to go on to break the cycle of poverty in their families. They don't have to pay a dime. In fact, it's all sponsored by the Hershey Company. So anytime you buy a Hershey product, you're helping support our kids, and you're also paying my salary, so thank you very much. So I've lived all over the United States. In fact, I lived in Coraopolis, not too far from here. I'm originally from Ohio. And just kind of kicked around the country. And so from being from Ohio, I'm going to admit this, okay? I know I'm in Steeler country, but I'm actually a Browns fan. So I know what suffering is all about. So I can put myself in your shoes on an in-service day because I know what suffering is all about. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about learning, not learning from just a general standpoint, but learning from a universal design for learning standpoint. And what exactly is that? And what that means is you have students in your classrooms who are very diverse. They may live in the same background or neighborhood. They may have the same clothes. Their parents may have similar occupations, but they're all different. And so how do you address the challenges that exist in your classrooms? You have gifted students rubbing elbows with students with IEPs. How do you deal with that? And so even though the way that we learn is as different as our DNA or fingerprint, there are some ways that it's the same. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and what does universal design for learning actually look like? So in order to get you thinking about what this UDL thing is all about, and what exactly does that mean? Does that mean we have to change the way we teach? No, it doesn't. I'm just going to show you some things that you're probably already doing that maybe you just need to do in a more strategic way. So anybody ever play Kahoot? Okay, so we may kill the internet here, so Chris, I'm sorry. But if you want to partner up with a person near you, or if you want to do this yourself on your device, if you have a device, if you go to kahoot.it, we're going to see what you know about UDL at this point. So it's kahoot.it. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to give you a code here. Oops. And once you can get out your phone, you can get out your tablet, there's a pin. And so we have this pin up here. It's 325-447. And as you can see, oh, go Eagles. All right. Boo. You know, the good thing about Kahoot is I can remove inappropriate names. So maybe I just remove that person's, yeah. All right. I don't know what's more entertaining, watching the names here pop up or... Group Z. All right. Nice, okay. AKA me. I like the emoji, we got an emoji in there. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Actually, we'll wait for a few more people. Barry Bonds, not me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And what we're going to do is we're going to, your device, if you're not familiar with Kahoot, your device is going to turn into a keypad. And so the very first thing that we're going to talk about is, what does UDL stand for? So is it Universal Design for Learning, Universal Disabilities Learning, Understanding by Design and Learning, or University of Dublin, London? All right. Okay, yeah, so very good. So you actually got the first question right. Congratulations, it's Universal Design for Learning. And the 11 of you who didn't get it right, you're going to have to stay till 5 o'clock tonight. All right, so let's go to the next one right here. The next one is, oh, we have a leader. Okay, very good. So the concept of Universal Design for Learning, it originated from what professional field? Actually, Universal Design, sorry, not for learning. Academia, medicine, architecture, psychology. So what are your thoughts? Okay, wow, so it looks like the majority of you said architecture, and you'd be absolutely correct. It is an architecture concept that has translated into academia. So with that, oh, unit principles, very good. Who is considered the originator of this concept of universal design? Pay special attention to his picture, especially in the bottom left-hand corner. I don't know if you can see a snippet of something. Oh, we're 3, 2, 1. All right, his name was Ron Mace. Yeah, Ron Mace. So what you didn't realize about Ron Mace was that he was confined to a wheelchair. So he couldn't access certain types of environments because he was confined to a wheelchair. And what he found was, if that was a problem for him, it's probably a problem for other people experiencing some type of physical disability. And so what Ron Mace did is he started the concept of universal design in architecture at the University, or North Carolina State University. But which of the following influenced Ron to do that? Hey, you're all right. Very good. Yeah, all of these different things inspired Ron to do this. We had disabled veterans returning home from World War I, World War II, the Korean War. We had the Civil Rights Movement. We had the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we also had advancements in technology which were leveling the playing field. So with all of these things in mind, which of the following would be an example of universal design in architecture or in product development? I love how the answers are just populating so quickly. So if you answered any of these, you would be absolutely correct. Because you have ramps, you have closed captioning on television, you have automatic doors, you have strobe lights. Think about all of these products though. They work for everybody. So if you're at the gym, or maybe your spouse goes to sleep before you do, you can watch TV with closed captioning. If you have a bag of groceries in your hand, or you have a stroller, or you have a wheelchair, you can go through an automatic door. And so all of these products are designed for all types of users. So which organization was responsible for taking universal design and using it to create accessible learning environments for all students? So you have Harvard University, the Massachusetts Department of Education, the Center for Applied Special Technologies, and the Federal Department of Education. Now, it looks like the majority of you said Harvard University. Unfortunately, you're not right, but you sort of are right, okay? It is the Center for Applied Special Technologies, also known as CAST. CAST is located in Wakefield, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. However, if you did say Harvard, 3 Harvard professors actually started CAST. So you would be technically right. So let's go on to the next one right here. And so the next question is this: when was it founded? So is this a relatively new concept? Take a look at this picture. This is one of the first students that CAST worked with. Yeah, see his glasses there? Those aren't real glasses for him. Hey, very good. Yeah, 1984. So did you see the picture of the kid? So his name was Matthew. And if you saw the glasses, they didn't have any lenses in there because Matthew was paralyzed from the neck down. Really, all he had movement was in his chin. And so what they did is they actually attached a switch to those glasses, which connected to a computer. And this allowed Matthew to participate in class, to be in the same classroom as other students. And so Matthew went on to earn a college degree simply because he had access to learning. If CAST didn't step in and do anything, we probably wouldn't know Matthew's intelligence today. And so with that, the UDL framework, which we're going to talk about in layman's terms today, is based on how many principles? So what do you think? How many principles? And it's based on brain science. Very good. So it's actually 3. So 3 principles it's based on, which we're going to talk about today. So let's see who's in the lead right now. Big Tasty. No comment. Which of the following factors were influences in designing universal design for learning, though? We have the concept of universal design, advancements in technology, assistive technology, Americans with Disabilities Act. Excellent. Hey, if you answered any of these questions, you are correct. All of these different things had an influence on universal design for learning. Hey, we got Turtle in the lead next. All right, last one. You got to get this right to see who our leader is. So UDL looks for learning what in lessons and front loads instruction with scaffolds and supports. All right, very good. So barriers. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. So thank you very much for participating. Oops, I closed out. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Oh no. Oh no, we'll never know. Oh my goodness. I am sorry. Jeez. All right, Chris, I got to leave. I let him down, you know? Okay. So the concept of universal design for learning, we're going to talk about it today. And I know I've been talking with many of your administrators, and they've told me that you're on this UDL journey. And some of you have heard some things about it, some of you haven't. Some of you have learned a little bit about it, some of you have learned a lot. And so what exactly is this, and how does it even relate to this technology idea? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to show you some practical things that maybe you already do, so that we can think about the barriers that our students have and help them overcome them. Okay? So UDL addresses the whole idea of variability. And it does it through a framework. And so that framework looks to create access. And it looks to create access by reducing high probability learning barriers. Now, let me ask you this. Think about any lesson that you give. And you know for a fact that kids are going to struggle with that. Kids are not going to get it this way. I'm going to have to go back and do it this way. You know that lesson that trips up students. I mean, you know it. You know that particular student whom, if you give group work, is going to have a problem. You know that student who always wants to work alone. You know that student who just doesn't seem to take social cues. You know it. So why not prepare for it? So when we're talking about the whole idea of variability and how things are totally different, I love these two quotes. The two quotes are, variability is the rule, not the exception. So, we have over 100 people in here, and every single one of you is different. Every single one of you, even though you might teach the same subject, teaches it different. You look at things differently. You have different beliefs. You have different talents. You have different abilities. We know that from an adult standpoint, but sometimes we forget that from a student standpoint. And if the way that we learn is as different as our DNA or fingerprint, and we're trying to customize learning and trying to infuse technology in the classroom, like how do we do it? It seems like an impossible feat. So how do we meet students where they need to learn? Well, a good example of this whole idea of variability is found in this book called The End of Average. And so this is Todd Rose. Todd actually used to teach at CAST. He is a professor at Harvard University. In fact, he's the department chair. And he wrote a book called The End of Average. If you ever get a chance to read it, I highly recommend it. And so he was talking about a problem that the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, was having in the 1950s. So what was happening was that planes were crashing left and right. And so the pilots were pointing fingers at the engineers and the mechanics, and the engineers and mechanics were pointing fingers at the pilots. And they knew that they had a big problem because it was happening over and over and over again. So what they did is they brought in some bigwig professor from Harvard University to try to figure out this problem. And so this professor goes and he talks with mechanics and he talks with engineers, he talks with pilots, try to figure out this problem. And so he has this brilliant idea. He found that the problem was the cockpit. Everything else on the plane was sound, but the problem was the cockpit. So in order to design a better cockpit, you know what he did? Is he took pilots and he measured them. He measured 10 different dimensions of these pilots. So he took as many pilots as he could, measured their legs, measured their arms, measured their torsos, measured their heads. And what he was going to do was he was going to try to find what the average pilot measured out to be. And some were taller, some were smaller, some were wider, some were thinner. And so he comes up with this design. And it doesn't work. You know why? There's no such thing as an average person. There really isn't. If I'm 6'4", so if you take 5 people that are 6'4", we're all going to have different leg lengths and arm lengths and torso lengths. Everybody's going to be completely different. And so they're scratching their head. They're trying to come up with how do we meet the needs of all of these pilots? How do we reduce the number of crashes? And so what they did is they changed the design of the cockpit. You enjoy that benefit today. It's called an adjustable seat. Anybody use one? So you use it in your car, you use it on planes, and it's just a simple design modification. Because when you design with the average person in mind, with the average student in mind, with the average teacher in mind, with the average adult in mind, you design for nobody. And so I think it's really great that this afternoon you're going to have the opportunity to go and choose where you want to go. You're going to have the opportunity to choose your learning. Because 1, it's more engaging, and 2, you're going to get more out of it, and 3, it's more effective. And so we do this with products, but sometimes we just don't do it in our classrooms. And I am the #1 guilty teacher responsible for ruining students. Let me tell you how I ruin students. So I found this comic a couple years back. And I think it's funny because it's Charlie Brown and Linus talking. And so they're talking about their teacher. And so Linus says that his teacher thinks that teaching's a lot like bowling, okay? All you have to do is roll the bowling ball down the middle and touch as many students as possible. And so Charlie Brown says, she must be a terrible bowler. And so think about that. When we roll the bowling ball down the middle of the room, sometimes we get some students, sometimes we don't. In high school, we're very content-driven, and so if a kid doesn't get it, they don't get it. We got to move on. We have pacing guides. We have to meet this particular objective this particular day. But what if we as teachers tried to throw a net down the middle of our room instead of a bowling ball? So like I had mentioned before, I ruined students. I was a horrible teacher. If we had to rank teachers, who's the best teacher in this room and who's the worst, I probably would be the worst. My very first year of teaching, I was teaching at a middle school. And we had a group of Russian immigrants move into our school district. Not just 1, not just 10, we had 30. And so this is a small rural school district in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. And so none of them knew English. They came into our schools, and we didn't know how to teach them. And so one day, my principal says to me, he says, well, you're going to have about 5 of them in your classroom, and you're going to need to teach them. And I asked him, how? I don't know Russian. I don't know what to do. And you know what he did? He gave me a picture book that you give to a kindergartner that has a ball, and then it says ball underneath. Apple and apple underneath. And he said, just give this to them and have them type it out. Think about that. The students would come into my room. Here, it's your problem, not mine. You're the one who chose to come over here in the United States. You're the one who chose not to learn language. You're the one, you're the one, you're the one, you're the one. I was so busy pointing the finger at them when I, as a teacher, probably should have been pointing it at myself. I didn't meet their needs. Now, granted, that was a very impossible situation, but I didn't have their best interests in mind. That happened more than 15 years ago, and it still haunts me today. Because I felt that the students were the problem, not necessarily me. And so when we look at the curriculum that we teach, whether it's aligned to certain standards, there's certain competencies students are meeting, sometimes we forget that it's the curriculum that's disabled, not necessarily the student. Because we have a one-size-fits-all average student approach sometimes that is like rolling a bowling ball down the middle of an aisle rather than meeting the students and helping provide the supports that they may or may not need. Because we may have 30 students in our classroom, they may be highly variable, and we may not understand what that variability is, but we sure as heck have to try. And so how do we do that? Because it seems like an impossible feat. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about considering the needs of the broadest possible users from the beginning. So there's a community down in Florida, and this community has a large population of hearing impaired individuals living in this community. And so because there are so many people that speak sign language, we sometimes take advantage of going through a drive-thru. Think about the convenience of a drive-thru. A drive-thru is designed for somebody who can speak and hear. And a drive-thru can be a barrier for somebody who doesn't have the best hearing. Think about that. We're automatically excluding somebody because of a disability. So down in this community in Florida, Starbucks came up with a brilliant idea. You may go to Starbucks and you may see their new computerized menus on their screen, but I don't know if you realize that it serves a dual purpose. It's not only the ability to change the menu without having to print things out, but it also has the ability to do this.
Welcome to Starbucks. What can we get started for you today? Hi, welcome to Starbucks. What can we get started for you today? Hi.
Isn't
that cool? So the barista that you see in that particular video wasn't necessarily a specialized barista that only spoke to people who are hearing impaired. That barista would take orders for anybody. But that simple modification of using technology in a way that would help benefit the widest range of users possible helped make something like a drive-thru feel like a freedom to somebody who never had access to it before. Think about that. Think about just the freedom that she must feel because of that simple modification, just addressing that variability that exists in our population. And so how do you address it? Because it's very difficult. So I want to show you this. Here's a set of numbers. Do you see the numbers? They're from 0 to 9, but there's a pattern. Do you see the pattern? Any clues? Because there is a pattern. You know, some people always start off, well, there's the even number, then there's the odd number, even number, odd, and then odd. Oh, okay, that doesn't work. But if you think outside the box, if you think differently, you will see the pattern. See, the numbers are in a particular order, but they're not in numerical order. They're in alphabetical order. You see that? So sometimes when we look at students in our classrooms, we see a bunch of numbers or a bunch of sets of eyes in our classroom, and we are sometimes overwhelmed by customizing instruction to their needs. But if we take a step back and we try to look at what they have in common, it's a little bit easier to address variability. So I'm going to show you the 3 ways that we are all the same, even though that we're different. 3 ways that we're the same. So do you remember the 1980s public service announcement? It was a drug public service announcement where they have the frying pan and they have the egg. Remember where I'm going with this? This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. They crack it open and fry it, and they say, any questions? Remember that? So if this is your brain, and this is your brain on UDL, this back part of the brain right here, okay, right back here, that's responsible for the what of learning. So even though we're so different, we still use this back part of the brain to make meaning of things. So when we're first doing something, we spend a lot of time and energy with this back part of the brain. And so in order to actually get something, sometimes we need to represent things differently. So I'm going to, I don't mean to get too personal here, but I'm going to get real personal right here, okay? I'm not the best handyman, okay? In fact, if you get a screwdriver in my hands, or you get a nail and hammer in my hands, something's going to blow up, okay? So I am not the best handyman at all. However, one thing that helps me is, I'm trying to do more do-it-your-own projects and things like that, trying to learn how to do it. But, I'll talk to people and they'll say, oh, you just do this, you do this, you do this. And I just don't get it. So you know what's helped me out? YouTube. You can look up anything on YouTube. So if you need to change, a faucet, look it up on YouTube. And so YouTube has been great for me because what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and I'll watch it, I'll pause it, I'll rewind it, and I'll go back. That helps me. You know those instructions that guys don't read? Okay? I throw them out and I go to YouTube instead. And so representing things differently is really something that we do all the time in our classes. You do it all the time. I'm not going to necessarily teach you anything new. I mean, you tell stories, you illustrate things, you use YouTube clips. But it's all about how we gather facts, how we use our senses to make meaning of the world around us. So let me share with you a couple ways that you may actually already be doing this. So before we do that, I want to show you this. Does anybody have any idea what this might be? Any guesses? Go ahead and shout it out. What do you think? An eye? Yeah. Fly's eye? Anybody see a football? I see a football. Not today? Yeah, not today. We're on a 6-month hiatus from football right now, right? So so right now what's happening is that back part of your brain is actually trying to make meaning of what this image is. Some of you have seen a microphone, some of you have seen a fly's eye, some of you are trying not to see a football, some of you are trying to see a football if you're an Eagles fan, all of these different things. But it is a fly's eye, okay? Or how about this? Any ideas? Newspaper? Okay, very good. Anybody have young children in your house? Okay, nobody? Okay, so, all right. So if you have young children in your house, you may have these, and you may have your kids stay away from walls. You know what I'm talking about? Crayons? Crayons, okay, yeah. They are not fun on walls. So what's happening, see, is the back part of your brain is trying to create a puzzle. It's trying to fill in the blanks with the minimal amount of information. Or how about this? Don't worry, this is appropriate. What? Big Bird. Big Bird? Okay. Yeah, it kind of does. Anybody see an elbow? Yeah? Some people have said, nope, good. How about T? Yeah, so it's all sorts of different things. So basically what the back part of your brain is doing is it's trying to make meaning of this. So think about this. If you're trying to teach your students how to multiply or divide fractions, how to analyze a poem, the reasons, the causes of the American Revolutionary War, and they have the wrong puzzle piece. They have the wrong background. They have the wrong perception. It could change the way that they do things, the way that they learn things. It could change a lot of different things. And so what we need to do is we need to represent things differently, and how we represent things differently is we can change their perception. So how many of you post things on YouTube? Okay, great. So is anybody flipping their classrooms in here? Okay. So if you're not familiar with the term flipping your classroom, there's a couple different ways to do it, but really essentially it boils down to you create some type of video or some type of online learning experience where students will use that outside a classroom to learn a concept, and then inside the classroom, you're actually doing things with it. You're asking questions, you're having discussion, you're putting what you learned to use. And so one of the things about posting videos is that where you post makes all the difference. Remember back to that hearing impaired example? Well, with that hearing impaired example is if we put a video online and it doesn't have closed captioning, we're automatically eliminating a whole entire population. You don't know if you're ever going to have a student who's hearing impaired, but it could be helpful for a student who's trying to learn English for the first time. It could be helpful for a student who might not understand what you're saying. So if you post something to YouTube, there's an automatic closed captioning feature.
So if you're an avid Google Slides user like myself,
have to turn it
you might
on.
have noticed there's a new feature called Google Q&A.
So it's right there. Now, it's not 100% perfect, but once again, it creates access for your students, and it's simply free. So you might think, okay, well, that's great, Matt. I don't really use videos in my class. Another thing that you possibly could do is one of the things that many schools are struggling with is field trips. How do you go on a field trip when you have a limited budget, or we don't have the time, we don't have the resources? So Google Earth now has a web-based version of Google Earth where you can go on different places and see different things. But they have this new Voyager feature. And when you go to this Voyager feature, I decided to go to the Kennedy Space Station here, and you can learn different things about the Apollo 14 module and other little cards to learn things. And it's simply a web-based version of Google Earth, which is really an excellent tool. Taking a little while here. The scary thing is that it even knows your exact location. So I can click right here on this exact location. We're going to allow it. And it'll even show us where we are in the room. Yeah, isn't that crazy? So we can see where we're at in the room. Now, what we can also do too is here's the Voyager feature. So I can go and I can see today, remembering Martin Luther King, exploring Prague. I can click right here on Martin Luther King, and I can start exploring, and what it'll do is it'll actually take me on a tour of Martin Luther King's life. So I can go to his birth home. I can see it right down here. I can use Bergman to actually go on the street and see his home. Wow. I can go and look around the street where he lives. I can learn more information right here, and I can simply toggle through. And as you can see, I can go to his historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. If I would like, say for instance, for a writing assignment, maybe I'm a language arts teacher and I want to find out, have my kids write, I can click on the I'm feeling lucky dice right here. And now what we can do is we can go to a specific place. Maybe we have a writing assignment about it. Maybe I have my students explore this. Maybe they learn a little bit more about this particular place. You can share right here. You can share this San Rafael Lake. You can share it simply by clicking this link and hitting share. Now, if you like Google Earth, and you can't necessarily see it. You like Google Earth, but you can't necessarily see using it. There's also another tool called Google My Maps. You can have your students create their own maps. So for example, you're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird, and you want your students to analyze To Kill a Mockingbird and write a 5-paragraph essay on To Kill a Mockingbird. What you can do in My Maps is you can pinpoint different places, create your own tour, copy and paste that paragraph into that particular point, add pictures, add videos, add links to external resources, and then have that shared with other students in the classroom to represent things differently. A friend of mine who lives in Kentucky takes his 8th grade students to Washington, D.C. every single year. And so they were talking about what they were going to do, what they were going to see, and so he used Google My Maps for his kids to chart out how they were going to get there and what they were going to see. And they did an itinerary, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. And so what happened was they actually came up with a route to get to Washington, D.C. that was an hour less in travel time than what the bus driver had. They asked the bus driver to test it out, and they actually did, so they got 1 more hour of time on that bus trip. Now, augmented reality is something that is really starting to change the way that we do things, and it's sometimes referred to as AR. So let's say, for instance, you want to teach your students about a certain type of life form. Why not take them to that life form and help them explore? So YouTube 360 it's been around for a little while, but what it does is it allows you to explore certain things in a different way. So here's a shark.
Sharks have amazing.
So you're watching a video. You can control this video by clicking and dragging. You can look up, you can look down, and there's all sorts of different things. Look at this shark. Oh my gosh, here he is.
And those muscles warm her blood.
Whoa, wow.
We now think
Jeez,
that
he missed us.
females may have to be
These are real videos that you see.
before they're even able to breed.
There's a
So
school of
they are
fish.
hugely threatened by being caught as
So YouTube 360, if you just go to YouTube 360, you can see all sorts of different things. Here's another one. This is on penguins. So I have penguins. And so I can see the terrain.
Barren island. We're not far from Antarctica. But what seems like a harsh and uninviting land to you is a home for penguins.
So here we go. We have some penguins.
And here they come. Meet
So I
the
can look
rock
behind me.
hoppers. Not named because of the rock star hair and
Oh,
makeup,
there's one.
but because,
Jeez.
well, you can guess.
It's a whole different way of watching video. So think about how powerful that is for a student to be able to see and go there and see it their own way. Think about how powerful that is in your classroom to use this as a tool to explore different things. There's all sorts of different videos out there on YouTube 360. Just do a simple search for YouTube 360. So remember the public service announcement? This is your brain. This is your brain on UDL. So this very front part of your brain, that's responsible for the how of learning, how we do things. And so when we first learn how to do something, we use that back part of the brain, but then what happens is we start thinking about it. It starts becoming natural. We start getting the skills necessary to perform. So I want to share with you how this part of the brain actually works. Because what it's responsible for is how we're planning, organizing our ideas, expressing our ideas. So how do you actually do that? So I have these these 6 matches right here. And so what would you do to arrange all of these matches to form 4 equilateral triangles? Now, equilateral triangles all have the same angle measurement. I believe it's 60 degrees. Isn't that correct? Math teachers? Yeah? So how would you arrange them to form 4 equilateral triangles? So if you want to talk to somebody next to you, go ahead. So how would you do it? Got it. Any ideas? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, okay, so make a square, put it flat, and then cross it, right? Does that work? If you actually took pens or matches or sticks of spaghetti noodles, you would find that what would happen is those middle ones wouldn't be quite long enough, okay? So we have to make an adjustment, don't we? We have to make it three-dimensional, right? So we have to make it three-dimensional like this in order for it to work. Yeah, so it shows you that, okay, we have to look at things different ways. Now, normally when I do this, I will do this in a workshop. And prior to that workshop, doing this in that workshop, I will actually use an exercise with spaghetti noodles. And when I do that with spaghetti noodles, I do it on purpose because I want to see how people react. Because when you give them a problem, how are they going to do it? So some people draw it, some people talk about it, some people get the spaghetti noodles out, but we all have different strategies for doing the same thing. Same thing with lesson planning, same thing with writing an assignment for maybe a grad class you're taking. We all have different strategies for accomplishing the same thing. So think about the students in your class who are given a writing assignment. Your goal is for them to write an essay. That's what they have to do. There might not be a whole lot of flexibility there, and that might be okay. It really depends on what your goal is. But think about the student who has cerebral palsy, think about the person who has a broken wrist, or think about the person who has difficulties getting their thoughts from their head to paper. How are they supposed to complete that assignment? They're automatically put at a disadvantage, sort of like a person who's hearing impaired going to a drive-thru. So how can we help them? Well, if you're using Google Docs, there's a simple tool in Google Docs to help you do that. It's called voice typing. If you just go up to the Tools menu and you go to voice typing, it is speech-to-text type of technology. If you want to do a Google search, just use Google Chrome. You can do the same exact thing, or use Siri on your iPhone. But this voice-to-text technology is not only helpful for us when we're trying to remind ourselves about something, or we're trying to text without texting in our car through our voice. Okay, this is a great tool to use. Why not use it in the classroom? Or think about this problem. Homework. Do you give homework? Well, Kim Meldrum in Canada had a problem with kids not turning in homework. I'm sure you don't have that problem here, right? And so what she found was that the majority of her students didn't necessarily complete homework because they got stuck, because they didn't have help at home. I mean, there's a variety of different reasons. So Education Weekly, the magazine, did a survey, and they found that most students don't necessarily do homework very well because their parents don't understand the material. Maybe their parents don't want to help their kids, or maybe they're just too busy. So how do you help students complete their homework if they don't have the help at home? I have a sixth grader and I have a third grader. And I tell you what, some of the assignments that they bring home, It's been a while since I've been in 6th grade and 3rd grade. It can be a little confusing if you're not that sure. And I'm an educator. Think about the parents who they haven't been to school in years. And so what Kim did is she said, you know what, I'm going to use a tool called Screencastify. What Screencastify is it's a Chrome extension. It is a Chrome extension which records your screen. You can use Screencast-O-Matic. You could use, if you have a Mac, QuickTime. I mean, there's a variety of tools out there to record your screen. And so what she would do is she would assign the homework to her students, and while she's explaining the homework to her students, she's recording it on her screen. Or she's using her webcam, using Screencastify, to record herself talking about it. And she even does a sample problem. And then what she does is she posts it to either YouTube or she posts it to Google Drive. And then what she found is that sometimes students may struggle with mean, median, and mode. So there's tons of educators out there who have created some really great videos on how to do that. So I'm going to put them in as well. And so what she did is she just created a playlist of 2 or 3 different videos so that students would have access to this while they were completing homework. Now, through the years, she said, you know, I wanted to take it a step further because access. How do they access it? How do they find this? And so all she did is she got a QR code to the actual channel and pasted it on the homework assignment. So now, when students are doing the homework assignment, if they have to do it on paper, they can scan using their cell phone, which they already have, and watch the video. Or their parents can scan that particular QR code, and now they can watch the video. And if you have an Android phone or you have an iPhone, you realize now that you don't need a special QR reader in order to scan a QR code. You just take out your phone, take out the camera, and it scans automatically. It takes you to the web page. So one of the other things is you may have your students do research. And so doing research, I always love the problems that you get doing research. Because you don't want your students necessarily to go to Wikipedia, right? And so what do you do to help your students find the most appropriate resources? So one of the best ways to do that could be creating your own Google custom search engine. Did you know you could do that? So if you go and just do a Google search for Google custom search engine, you can create your own custom search. So this is what it looks like. So you go right here and you create a new custom search engine. You just put in what websites you want Google to search through. So I put in abc.com, I put in fox.com, and our local news station, wgal.com. And then what I did is I just gave it a name. I called it Matt Search Engine, and then I hit create. And then all I do is I just share this link with my students. Now when they type in a search term like, oh, I don't know, Donald Trump, which you're going to find a lot of information on right now, you're going to search and check it out. All the resources, maybe you can't see this very well, but all the resources are only going through those websites. As you continue to add resources and websites throughout your course, you can keep adding them to this Google custom search engine, and it will only work through those particular websites. So you have that. But I've also noticed, too, that any time that you give any assignment to students, you generally have 3 types of students. You have the students who'd wish you'd just be quiet and leave them alone because they won't work on their own. You have the needy students who need you every single minute of the day, who need to explain everything like 3 times. And then you have the frequently asked questions kids who feel bad for asking you questions because you're helping somebody who they think they actually needs the help and they don't. And so how do you help them? Well, what I started doing was I started thinking about the 2 or 3 things that would trip my students up. In any assignment, you know that there's 2 or 3 things that are going to trip your students up. So why not come up with frequently asked questions? So a great way to do that, here's an example that I came up with, is a research project that I had my students do. And in Google, you can add links to different parts of your assignment. So you can add links to frequently asked questions. You can add links to specific parts of the web page simply by going up to the Insert menu and Table of Contents. That's simply what you do. If you want to learn a little bit more about how to do that, I'm doing some workshops later today on how to actually enter that. I got about 20 minutes left here, so I want to focus on two more things, and that is options for engagement. You know, engagement, if you have students that are not engaged, if you have teachers who are not engaged, if you have adults that are not engaged, there's not a lot of learning happening. And so how do you actually get students motivated? There's books and workshops and entire graduate programs devoted towards engaging students. So how do we do it? It's a great question. So I want you to think just for a second and talk with somebody near you about your least favorite teacher or favorite teacher while you were in school. It could be elementary, middle, high school, college, graduate work. But think about that teacher, talk about that teacher, and what made them your favorite or least favorite. Okay, go ahead. I might go over just a tad.
Oh, good.
Okay. Okay.
We know what we have for the next 60 after. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
it's like government and all that kind of stuff. Wow.
About 45 seconds. And we want to start wrapping up. So I'm very sure that there was something about that particular person that caught your attention. How many of you talked about your favorite teacher? Just with a show of hands. Okay, very good. Okay. How many of you least favorite teacher? Okay, all right. So it looks like the majority of you talked about your favorite teacher. There probably was something about them. You could feel something when you walked into their room. There was some type of connection. Maybe it was the subject that they taught. Maybe it was the passion that they taught. Maybe it was just something about them. That least favorite teacher, same thing. There was something about them that repulsed you. There was something about them that just was annoying. There was something about, they just didn't feel passion for their subject, maybe. See, one of the things when I ask this question is I always think about my favorite teacher and my least favorite teacher. And my favorite teacher in high school was Mrs. Jerry Gutman. Actually, Mr. Melnick, you probably know her. Mr. Melnick actually taught at my high school, and I knew him before coming here. Yeah, which is kind of neat. I didn't realize he was here now. And Mrs. Jerry Gutman created a classroom where you were family. In fact, she had a whole entire wall in her room devoted to pictures of her students, her senior pictures wall. And she posted them all over the wall. And she had dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of these pictures. And I'll never forget when my daughter was born, she said, "I want a picture of your daughter." And so she put it on the board, and then her students started asking, "Well, did he have her when he was in high school?" You know, asking the, no. But she created a family. She's the reason why I'm here today. She's the reason why I'm here today, because I never would have become a teacher hadn't it been for her. But Mrs. Gutman, as great of a teacher as she is, I'm sure there were some students that found that she wasn't their favorite teacher. See, every single teacher in here right now, including myself, has been somebody's point of access, and unfortunately, we've been somebody's barrier too. And you know, that's a hard thing to think about, because we could be the barrier. It could be a variety of different things. It could be our personality. It could be we just don't mesh. There's just a variety of things. But it's important to keep in mind that we have the power to be somebody's access, but we also have the power to be somebody's barrier too. So how can we engage our students in our classroom? How can we help them understand the why of learning? And so there's all sorts of different ways, but it kind of comes down to this. This is an fMRI brain scan. And so these are 3 different brains. And they had the person tap. And so they scanned their brain while they were tapping. And so as you can see, up in the top left-hand corner, there's a little bit of activity going on in the back part of the brain. Okay, they're trying to figure out what they're doing. The top left-hand corner, there's really not a whole lot going on. It almost looks like if you took a picture of North Korea at night. It looks very similar. And then you have the bottom, where there's brain activity in the back, there's brain activity in the front, there's brain activity in the middle part. And if this is your brain on UDL, that's the middle part, the engagement part. Why does this brain look so much different than this brain and this brain? They're just tapping. It's because the person on the bottom took that task and is tapping out a song. Okay? The person up here is just mindlessly tapping. I don't know what this person's doing. They're just figuring out what tapping means, I guess. But the point is that we can all take something and turn it into a 4th of July fireworks explosion or nothing at all. So when I was talking to you earlier, I had mentioned that I had moved around quite a bit growing up. I'm originally from northeastern Ohio, but I kicked around the country And I actually lived in Texas. I've lived in upstate New York. This is my third time in Pennsylvania. And I will never forget moving from Texas to Pennsylvania again and being stuck in a school that I would be in that school for only 3 months and then I'd move to another school. Between 5th grade and 7th grade, I went to 6 different schools. That was hard. That was very hard. And so I'm sitting in this one classroom and we're doing a project, and I am just a shy, terrified 5th grade student who knows that we're going to be moving again. And so I'm sitting in this classroom and my teacher tells me that we're going to do a project. I forget her name, but I'll never forget the project. She said that we were going to do something on renewable energy. You're going to create an invention on renewable energy and you're going to present it to the class. Now, I had never presented before in my life, so I'm terrified. And I put hours into this, and I'm going to make a water-powered car. And so I draw this thing, and I put it on a poster, and I'm practicing, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing that. And so the day of the presentations comes. And so my classmates go, I'm sitting there, and I just do not want to go. I'm already being made fun of. Why do I want to be made fun of more? And so my teacher calls me up. It's my turn to make the presentation. And something happened. Something happened in me. It was like, oh my gosh, like I like this. And so I start presenting this idea. And I get done, and my face is just red, because I blush very easily. And I go sit down on my seat, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope I did a great job. My teacher comes up to me after class, and she says, Matt, that was amazing. I want you to do that again for my next class. And I'm thinking, what? So I go into her next class. I'm excused from my previous class to go make a presentation on a water-powered car. That teacher unlocked something in me that I never knew I had. I had a voice. I enjoyed presenting. And she's another person that I would never be here today hadn't she given a silly assignment about renewable energy that I could have done this, but my brain did this. There was something about that assignment. And so, what about you? What about your class? You know those kids that just take something and they take it beyond anything that you could imagine. So there's all sorts of different ways of getting kids engaged, and mine was recruiting interest. That example was recruiting interest. But even something as simple as helping our kids sustain effort and persistence. This is Eddie. Eddie is actually one of my seniors a couple years ago in my class, and he's showing these solo cups. Now, if you remember, when we were in college, we used to use solo cups to play some type of game. I forget what that game was. It had a ping pong ball or something, okay. But anyways, they make them in different colors. And so they make them in red and yellow and green. And so what I started doing is anytime we were doing projects in class, I would just have my kids flip the cups over. If they were good, they're green. If they were struggling a little bit but working through, is yellow. And if they were stuck, they were red. So as I'm going around the room and helping kids, I have a visual. Well, I liked that idea, and I used it for many, many years. But then, technology is great because it transforms things. So a good friend of mine from New Jersey created this app called Classroom Q. It does the same exact thing, but it takes it a step further. So what happens is students log in, they get a code, just like Kahoot, and then if they have a question, they press a button and they type in their question. Then what happens is it pops up on your screen as a teacher, so as you're walking around the room, you can see who asked what question, who should be first, who should be second, who should be third, because it timestamps everything and keeps it in chronological order, right? Go figure. So that was just a really neat tool to use. But many of you talked about your teachers and how they created a classroom environment that was very inviting. This is something else that a middle school teacher in York, Pennsylvania, one of my graduate students actually came up with. We were studying about how anger works. See, when we get angry, we go from calm to annoyed to angry to hopefully never enraged. And so what she would have her students do is come into the class each day, and she'd ask them where they're at. Where are you at today? Are you at a 0, a 1, a 2? Hopefully nobody was at a 3. But as with group work, you're going to have conflict that arises. And so she had this thing called a mad pass. And so if there was some type of conflict or a student was getting really frustrated, they'd grab the mad pass and they would go into a spot in a room to just refocus. And there was another piece of paper which was their ticket. And what they had to do is they had to analyze what they were doing, why they felt that way, what they're going to do differently. I don't know what the questions were, but that was their ticket back into their seat. It was just a simple way to change the classroom environment from arguing all the time to start being a little bit more cognizant of things. Like I had mentioned earlier, even something as simple as choice, when appropriate, can be very helpful. So for example, in my class, we would often do current events. And so I created a tic-tac-toe board of choices for my students. They all had to do the same exact thing, but they could do it in a different way. So they all had to do the first part, find a current event, but they could find that current event either as a written source, a podcast, or even a news report. And then what they'd have to do is summarize it. Now, they all had to summarize it the same way, but they could type it out, they could do a podcast, or they could create a video of it. And then the last part is they had to share their opinion. Once again, they had some options for doing that. There's a school in Indiana called the Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation. It is the mecca for UDL. So if you want to see UDL working, you need to go there. Because BCSC is leading the pack. And they were actually featured on this one grant where they created a video, and they created a tic-tac-toe board of an industrial revolution project. And so they had different components of this industrial revolution project that students had to do. It was amazing. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. Because they gave students choice, which was very helpful. So putting this all together, I like to think of the UDL guidelines, or UDL principles right here, of multiple means of engagement. We need to engage students differently. The front part of our brain, we need to help students show what they know or through action expression by providing them some different options for action expression. In the back part of the brain, we need to represent things differently. If we can engage students differently, represent things differently, and have them show what they know differently, we're doing a great job of addressing variability. And many of you do it all the time. So I'm not necessarily coming in here and teaching you something differently. But see, the difference between what you're doing, what I'm doing, what the person in the next school is doing, is are we actually proactively planning, or are we reacting? So are we being proactive in addressing variability, or are we being reactive? Because when we're being proactive, we're addressing student needs before and having things in place. If we're being reactive, we're being like me, throwing a book at a student, telling them to type it, because they're an inconvenience, not the curriculum. So I want to just share with you the last part right here. How are we going to create access? If we create access, we sort of do what you see here in this comic. See, there's a student in a wheelchair who's trying to get up a ramp, and you have a custodian who's clearing off the steps. And so this kid in the wheelchair says, hey, can you clear off the ramp? And the custodian gets a little angry because there's more students trying to get up the steps. And he says, look, I'll take care of you after I take care of them. And the kid in the wheelchair says something amazing. He says, but if you clear off the ramp, we can all get in. So how are you clearing off a ramp? What could you do? What one small thing could you do to clear off a ramp? One way you might see clearing off a ramp is this guy. His name is, oh my gosh, geez, I forget his name. He is a programmer at Google. One of the things that he's brilliant. He's an absolute brilliant guy, and I can't remember his name. Gosh darn it. But anyways, he is a brilliant programmer, and he's blind. With the advancements in technology, he is able to program. In fact, Google picks him up at his house. They have a service that picks him up at his house, takes his dog, goes in, works, and programs some of the most amazing things. But he also has another talent. See, he can solve a Rubik's Cube in less than 30 seconds. So, anybody ever solve a Rubik's Cube in here? Okay. All right, there's a few. You know, solving a Rubik's Cube involves many different strategies. One of my strategies involves peeling off stickers. But for some reason, people, they know that you cheat. But he actually has an algorithm that he follows. And so there are special Rubik's Cubes out there with just Braille. Okay? But what's the problem with that Rubik's Cube? You can only use it if you're blind. So if we were to universally design this Rubik's Cube, it might look like so. And it might actually have color and Braille. This is him solving this Rubik's Cube in less than 30 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, got it. So he solved it in less than 30 seconds. And the whole idea is that Rubik's Cube, the way that it was designed, could be used by a person who is blind, could be used by a person who wasn't blind. But it's all about how it was designed, being proactive rather than reactive. Because think about it. If we were being proactive with that, we would design it with color and Braille. If we were being reactive, we'd use a Sharpie and try to color it in after the fact. So what it involves is it involves a paradigm shift. So let me tell you a quick story. Okay? So what I did is in 2010, I had lost my job. Budget cuts. And so I'm trying to find a position, and I'm not having a whole lot of success. It's about this same time that I'm also teaching graduate classes for LaSalle University, and they tell me, they say, hey, we want you to learn about this idea of universal design for learning. And I'm like, what? What is that? And they said, oh, it's about technology. Well, it's not necessarily all about technology, but technology is a component of it. And so I go to West Philadelphia in a cheap Ramada hotel, and I take this class with this guy named John Mundorf. Now, some of you might know John. John's from Florida. John's a good friend of mine. But I didn't know him at that time. And so he starts talking to me about this whole idea of universal design for learning. And I'm like, okay, yeah, it kind of makes sense. You know, you need to represent things differently, show what you know differently, and engage students. I get it. So about a week later, I get a job interview at the Milton Hershey School. And they want me to come in and teach a lesson to administrators. So I do. And I start using UDL. And they love it. So I go in, I get the job, and I don't do anything with it for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden, I have Omri right here from Pittsburgh. Omri's from Pittsburgh. Omri was probably one of the most challenging students I've ever had in my life. And he was a big football player who didn't want to wear glasses because that wouldn't look good in front of the girls. And so Omri actually is pretty much blind without his glasses. So every single time I give a reading assignment, I have to photocopy up to like 1,000% just for him to read this. So one day, an act of God happened. The photocopy machine broke. And so the photocopy machine breaks, and so I'm scrambling around, and so I'm thinking, I'm just going to give Omri a PDF copy of this particular reading assignment, because that's all I have. What started happening was that other students started saying, hey, Mr. B, I actually could use that too. And so what I started doing is I started giving my students a PDF copy or a physical copy. Not a really big modification. One student told me, they said, it's so much easier to zoom in one paragraph at a time and highlight. Okay. So I go on, and I have another kid. His name's Jamar. Jamar's from Delaware. And every single time that we'd give a reading assignment, he would try to get out of it. And so at one point, I talked to Jamar, and we have a good heart-to-heart conversation. And I say, Jamar, this just can't go on. And he says to me, he says, Mr. B, every single time that we do a reading assignment, I feel stupid because I need to read it out loud or I need to hear it. He said, can I just go out in the hallway and read it out loud? I said, sure. And so then what started happening is other students wanted to go out in the hallway. 2, then 3, then 4. So I knew I needed to do something. So I found a free program called Audacity, and I started recording myself reading these articles and giving my students the ability to listen to it, have an electronic copy, or a paper copy. Now, you all might think, well, Matt, that probably takes a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time. You're right, it did. So we all have students who get done early, right? So what I started doing is I said, hey, congratulations, you're my narrator for today. And so they would start recording themselves reading this particular article. And then what I had is a library of different articles. Now, there's technology that does this for us today, but at the time there wasn't. But the whole idea is that reading, the median was the barrier. Okay? So then I started thinking, too, about my kids. Now, kids who come from poverty are really, really far behind when it comes to vocabulary. Marzano actually says the achievement gap is largely a vocabulary gap. And so, we may have affluent kids in our class, but we will have students who are not. So how do we meet them where they're at? Or how do we teach new vocabulary terms? So I knew that there was probably about 5 or 6 vocabulary terms that I would need to pre-teach that they would struggle with. And so what I started doing, instead of repeating myself over and over and over again, I just started using Quizlet to do it. Anybody ever use Quizlet? Yeah, it's a great tool. So I started doing that because students actually need 6 meaningful interactions with vocabulary terms in order to solidify their meaning. But here's the other thing. As I started thinking about the words that my students didn't know, that I took advantage of. Now, I could tell them, hey, go look it up in the dictionary, but that doesn't necessarily work. So I found a website. It's called Blanchin Shahi, or Blachin Shahi. Now, just to let you know, Chris, I'm going to let you know this too. Don't go to shahi.com. You will get fired, okay? It's not a good site. But if you go to www.blachin.com/Shahi, this will actually take you to a visual dictionary. What it'll do is you'll put in a term, and then there'll be Flickr images that pop up on the side, which are filtered, that you can use for your students to understand what the vocabulary term was. So, I'm going about, and then I thought, how many of you know those students where you give an assignment, and that assignment disappears into the black hole known as their backpack? Never to emerge again. And so what I started doing is I started putting everything together, all of these resources together, in something called a live binder. What it is it's an electronic binder. And so it has different tabs for different things. So I had the audio copy, the electronic copy. They could print it out if they wanted to. They get stuck with a vocabulary term, they just go to this tab. They go to that tab. And so that was one way that I started using UDL in my classroom because I was being proactive rather than reactive. And one of the things I love about being out here in Western PA is that you speak my language. Because we don't call it soda, we call it what? Pop, okay? When I was in Texas, it was kind of weird because they call everything Coke. So you would ask them, you say, what do you want to drink? Coke? What kind? Root beer? Okay, that's just how they do things down there. So what I started thinking is I started changing the way that I thought about lessons by P, predicting barriers that may happen, okay, high probability barriers that are going to occur in my lesson. O, looking for ways to overcome them, because I know that all students, even though they're different, they're the same in 3 different ways. We may need to overcome some of those barriers by representing things differently, having them show what they know differently, or engage differently. And then I just start planning my lesson. I didn't need to overcomplicate things. I just needed to make it simpler. Okay, so as I wrap up here, you might be saying, well, Matt, where do I start? Where do I start? Do what you can with what you have where you're at. That's what Teddy Roosevelt said, and it applies to you. So, a great example of this occurred in Mujali Island. So Mujali is actually part of India. And there's this, it's one of the largest river islands in the world. But it has a problem. See, what happens is during rainy seasons, it's starting to erode. In fact, it's lost 70% of its landmass in the past 100 years. Some experts say that if nothing happens, it's going to disappear. So this guy right here, Jadav was a local villager, and he knew that there was a problem. He just wasn't sure what the problem was. And so one day he's going to the river, and he sees snakes washing up on shore. They're trying to escape this island and get to safe ground during the raining season. And he knew that this island was eroding. And so he thought about what he could do. This is 1979. He thought about what he could do. And so he thought, you know what? I'm going to plant trees. So he gets in this rowboat. He has a couple seeds, goes over to the island, goes into a part where he can plant seeds. Gets back on his boat, goes back to his work. He does this religiously every single day for almost 30 years. No one knows what he's doing. He's not a very boastful person, so he just keeps planting seeds every single day. Fast forward to 2009, and you have a photographer who's in the area from National Geographic. This photographer is photographing the town that Jadav lives in, and he noticed this man getting into a boat, going over to this uninhabited island, and then coming back. And he noticed that this happens every single day. So he follows him one day, and he discovers the forest man of India, a man who's planted an entire ecosystem, which has not only saved that island, but has saved endangered species and has created an area that is bigger than Central Park in New York. All because one man chose to plant seeds on a daily basis. He didn't receive any reward. There were days that he probably didn't want to do it, but he got in that boat anyways because he knew that one small thing can make a huge impact. John Butterall is also an example of a man who didn't realize how one small thing could make a movement. He created something called virtual photo walks. John's a photographer in Canada, gets in his boat every day, and goes and takes pictures. And so what he did one day is he took his camera and he attached his smartphone to his camera and went on a Google Hangout. And he invited people to come along with him on a journey of taking pictures.
Freedom for me has always just been going for a walk in the woods, finding the perfect light and getting the shot. I think I started when I was 12 years old, putting that canoe on my shoulders, carrying it down to the lake, and going for paddle. John Butterall, as a young photographer, his epic canoe trip, 1969. That was a long time ago. One day, I was out taking pictures, and I thought, how cool would it be to attach a phone to your camera and hang out with 5-10 people, and they would see exactly what I was seeing through the viewfinder of my camera.
It was gorgeous.
It was pretty amazing. And the next day, Corey Fisk came into the hangout.
I love photography, and I have been living with MS 10 years, and this is my world. There's nothing more to my world than that.
I just said, tomorrow I'll take you for a walk. I'm going to walk closer to that old tree over there.
Down a little,
Okay.
a little more, right there. Lovely.
Look up. Look way up.
Oh, I like that a lot. Yeah, macro that one.
Got it. For a few brief minutes, she wasn't going to be in that bed. She was going to experience her own momentary escape. She was on a virtual photo walk, and we didn't even know what one was then, but we were sure doing it. The next day, we posted the video. People saw it and started sharing it, and photographers all over the world jumped on board.
So we're bringing lots of people around and giving them a Hawaii view here.
Oh, yes, we have a sea turtle.
Look at this.
Oh my goodness.
We're in beautiful Cape Town with a couple of buffalo.
This is Utah Lake.
I'll be emailing you photos soon.
I never anticipated that so many photographers would give their time and feel so committed.
One little change, one little action, one thing that he just thought, you know what? I just want to take people on a cool adventure. And it unlocked a world for somebody who is confined to just their room. See, I don't know if we really appreciate the power of one small action. I don't know if we sometimes really understand the power of one moment, one seed that you plant. Simply by being proactive rather than reactive. Simply by engaging students. Simply by looking at things through their eyes. Because, as the example that I had mentioned to you earlier, even the smallest task can have tremendous impact. Thank you guys for having me here today. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. I'll leave this slide up, but this has my contact information and also my blog. It's also on the app if you'd like a copy of the presentation. I'll be here throughout the rest of the day. At this point, what we're going to do is we're actually going to transition into the cafeteria. We will go over there and we'll have an activity that we're going to do. Chris is going to help me out with that, and we'll explain more when you get there. But as you get there, you're going to be sitting with your departments downstairs in the cafeteria where the food was being served this morning. So see you in a few.